Billionaire secretly followed his old black Maid after work. What he saw left him in tears. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to our main character. It started on a Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet suburban dusk where the air feels still, like a secret is waiting to be heard. Inside a sprawling 12,000-square-foot mansion north of Atlanta, billionaire Raymond Cole stood by the marble staircase, watching the old maid shuffle out the front door. Her name was Martha Green, 72 years old. Slow steps, faded uniform, hands stiff from decades of scrubbing other people's floors. She always left exactly at 6 p.m. Not a minute early, not a minute late. But tonight, something in the way she clutched her worn canvas bag made him pause. Earlier that day, he had noticed she skipped lunch, worked through break, and politely declined the driver he offered. She had been with the Cole family for almost 8 years, yet she told him almost nothing about her personal life. No complaints, no requests, no stories, just that warm, tired smile that said she didn't expect much from the world anymore. But an incident that afternoon gnawed at him. He had walked past the pantry and seen Martha quickly hide an envelope in her apron, her hands trembling like the paper itself was dangerous. When he asked if everything was okay, she simply whispered, "Yes, sir," and walked away with that same polite dignity she always carried. Something about it didn't sit right. Not after he overheard her coughing again. Not after he noticed how loose her shoes had become. Not after he caught her wiping tears in the laundry room when she thought no one was around. By the time she stepped outside, disappearing into the dimming orange light, Raymond made a decision. He grabbed his keys, slipped into his black SUV, and followed. Not out of suspicion, but out of a strange, unexplainable worry. The farther she walked, the more out of place she looked against the backdrop of his wealthy neighborhood. Her small figure moved past gated estates, manicured lawns, and private security posts, heading toward streets where the lights flickered and the pavement cracked. She didn't take a bus, didn't call a ride. She just walked. One slow mile, then another. Raymond kept a careful distance, headlights dimmed. She crossed under an overpass, where the roar of cars above sounded like thunder, then turned toward a neighborhood he had never dared to enter. The houses shrank, paint peeled. Windows were boarded up. A stray dog barked in the distance. And still she walked, her shoulders squared against the world like she had done it her whole life. Finally, she reached a tiny, collapsing duplex with a sagging porch and a mailbox hanging crooked by one rusted screw. She looked around once, as if checking no one saw her, and slipped inside. Raymond parked half a block away, heart pounding harder than he expected. Why was she living here? On a maid's salary. He paid her well, better than any other staff. She should have been able to afford comfort, at least safety. But what he saw next froze him. The front door creaked open, and a faint light glowed. Martha reemerged, not with her bag, but with a tray of warm food covered by aluminum foil. She crossed the yard, knee-deep grass brushing against her ankles, and knocked gently on the door next to hers. A small voice answered. A child's voice. Weak, fragile. And when the door opened fully, Raymond saw the outline of a boy, no older than 8, struggling to stand, an oxygen tube taped beneath his nose. Martha whispered something soft, set the tray down, adjusted his blanket, and pressed her forehead to his. In that moment, the billionaire who thought he knew everything about the woman who cleaned his home felt his chest crack open. Because the look in her eyes was not sadness. It was love, and it told a story he had never cared enough to ask. Raymond Cole remained frozen in his SUV, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. The image of Martha kneeling beside that sick little boy lingered in his mind like a ghost refusing to step back into the dark. This old maid, the woman he had barely spoken more than a handful of words to, was living a life far heavier than anything he had imagined. And he had followed her thinking she might be doing something wrong. Shame pressed against his chest with a weight he could not shake. He watched the thin glow of the porch light fade behind her as she walked back toward her own door. The night air was cold enough to sting, but she moved slowly, carefully, as if her bones had learned to endure pain without complaint. Raymond started the engine again and inched forward, just enough to see where she would go next. Martha entered the duplex and flicked on a small lamp near the window. The light revealed peeling wallpaper, a sagging couch, and a room that looked more like a shelter than a home. She slipped off her shoes, rubbing her swollen ankles, then opened a drawer and pulled out another envelope. Raymond squinted. It was the same type of envelope he saw her hide earlier at the mansion. She sat at a tiny table beneath a flickering bulb and began counting cash, small bills, worn-out dollars, a few coins. Then she did something that made his heart twist even tighter. She opened a stack of medical bills. The pages were thick, folded, and stained from being held too many times. Each sheet was stamped with amounts no maid could ever hope to pay. Raymond leaned back, the reality crashing into him all at once. The child next door was not hers, but she was taking care of him like her own blood. And she was drowning trying to keep him alive. He thought about the lunch she skipped, the shoes that were too loose, the cough, the trembling hands. Suddenly it all made sense. She was starving herself to feed him. She was saving every penny to buy his medicine. She was walking miles every day because bus fare was too expensive when she had a sick child depending on her. He felt his throat tighten, but he could not look away. A moment later, Martha put the money into an envelope, sealed it, and pressed it to her forehead as if praying over it. Then she whispered something he could not hear, but the gesture alone was enough to crack something inside him. Minutes passed before she stood up, grabbed a worn sweater, and walked back outside, heading once again toward the child's house. Raymond followed on foot this time, keeping to the shadows. She knocked gently, and when the door opened, the older woman inside, likely the grandmother of the boy, hugged Martha with a gratitude that looked painfully familiar. They whispered. They cried. They held each other like two women carrying the weight of the world between them. Then Martha pulled out the envelope and handed it over. The grandmother resisted at first, shaking her head, but Martha insisted, placing the envelope firmly into her hands. Raymond felt something warm slide down his cheek before he realized he was crying. Not soft tears, the kind that come when a man sees truth for the first time. He stayed there in the dark, hidden behind an old fence, watching the woman who scrubbed his floors live with more bravery than he had seen inside any boardroom. After a few minutes, Martha left the house again and began walking back to her own. Her steps were slow, her breathing uneven, her hand pressed to her back as if the weight of her life was physically bending her. But she did not complain. She did not collapse. She just kept walking, one small step at a time. Raymond returned to his SUV, his heartbeat echoing loudly in the quiet street. For a long moment, he sat still, staring at the windshield fogging from his breath. Everything he thought he knew about Martha Green had been wrong. This was not just a maid. This was a woman carrying an entire world on her shoulders while asking nothing in return. And for the first time in a long time, the billionaire felt small. Very small. Raymond Cole barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Martha's trembling hands placing that envelope of money into the grandmother's palms. By sunrise, he was still sitting at his kitchen island, his untouched coffee cold, his mind replaying every detail he had witnessed. How had he lived in the same house with her for 8 years without knowing any of this? How many times had he walked past her without truly seeing her? As the morning light crept through the window, he made a decision. He needed answers, not as an employer, but as a man who had finally realized how blind he had been. By the time he reached the mansion, Martha had already been working for an hour. She moved quietly through the hallway, carrying a basket of clean linens, her steps slow but steady. Raymond watched her from the end of the corridor, noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The stiffness in her right knee, the careful way she shifted her weight, the exhaustion hidden behind her small smile. When she saw him standing there, she froze slightly, startled. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, her voice warm but tired. "I did not expect you to be home this early." He swallowed hard. "Martha, could you join me in the sitting room for a moment?" She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice, then nodded. They sat across from each other, the silence between them thick. Raymond opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. How could he tell her he had followed her? How could he admit he had seen everything without sounding intrusive or disrespectful? Martha folded her hands gently in her lap. "Sir, is something wrong?" Her tone was polite, but her eyes carried a quiet awareness, as if she had long learned to anticipate bad news. Raymond exhaled. Martha, I saw where you went last night. The room froze. Her shoulders tensed. Her hands tightened slightly. She looked down, the shame on her face immediate and heartbreaking. I am sorry, sir, she whispered. I did not mean to cause trouble. I know my neighborhood is not the kind of place someone like you would want your staff living. I do not have many options. Martha, he said gently, that is not why I am here. She slowly lifted her gaze, confusion flickering across her eyes. Then why, sir? Raymond leaned forward, his voice low, almost unsteady. The boy next door? Is he your grandson? She closed her eyes for a moment before answering. No, sir. His name is Caleb. He is my late sister's grandson. When she passed, his grandmother became his only guardian. They were struggling. She is too old to work, and his mother, her voice cracked. His mother passed from complications when he was 5. Raymond felt his chest tighten. And you have been helping them alone all this time? Martha nodded slowly. Someone had to. They have nobody else. The medical bills keep rising, and the boy's condition keeps getting worse. I try to give what I can. I know it is not enough, but I do what I am able. Raymond rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. Martha, why did you never tell me? She smiled sadly. Because, sir, it is not your burden. You already give me a job. That is more than many people are willing to do. I am grateful for that. The rest is my responsibility. Something inside him twisted. This woman who had almost nothing was carrying a weight that would crush most people, and she thought she owed him gratitude. Martha, he said quietly, you should never have had to do this alone. But she shook her head. People like me, sir, we do things alone all the time. That is just life. The simplicity of her words hit him like a blow. He stared at her, this woman who had stood in his house for 8 years, unseen yet irreplaceable. She was not just cleaning rooms. She was surviving. She was giving. She was sacrificing more than anyone knew. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire felt something shift inside him, a spark of understanding, a recognition of dignity he had overlooked. He sat there in silence, realizing that this story was not about wealth at all. It was about a woman whose heart was bigger than the world had ever bothered to notice. For a long moment, Raymond Cole did not know what to say. The weight of Martha's quiet suffering pressed against the walls of the sitting room, filling every inch of space between them. She sat still, her hands folded neatly, waiting for whatever judgment or decision might come next. She had lived her entire life preparing for disappointment, for doors closing, for people in power turning away. But today, something different stirred in the air. Raymond cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. Martha, I need you to understand something. What you are doing for that boy and his grandmother is not something ordinary. It is extraordinary, and it is not something you should carry in silence. She gave a tired smile, the kind that spoke of decades spent swallowing pain without complaint. Sir, kindness is not extraordinary. It is simply what people should do for each other. That sentence, simple and soft, struck him harder than any speech he had heard in a boardroom. He suddenly realized he was sitting across from a woman whose moral compass outshone his own by miles. A woman who had nothing, yet chose to give everything. He leaned forward. Martha, may I ask, how long has Caleb been sick? Her eyes softened. Since he was 4, he was diagnosed with a rare lung condition. The treatments are expensive. The medications alone cost more than I earn in a month. The grandmother tries her best, but she is not strong enough to work long hours anymore. So I help where I can. I work here to pay their bills, and I take extra shifts when they fall behind. Raymond's stomach twisted. And you do all of this by yourself? She nodded. I have been blessed with the ability to work, sir. As long as I can still move, I will help them. Anyone would do the same. But he knew that was not true. Most people he knew, most people in his world, would not do the same. They would look away, call it sad, and move on with their comfortable lives. He took a breath. Martha, I want to help. Her eyes widened slightly, alarmed. Oh no, sir. I could never ask that of you. You are not asking, he replied gently. I am offering. She shook her head, her voice trembling. Sir, with all due respect, people only offer help because they feel sorry for us. I do not want pity. I only want to do what is right. This is not pity, he said firmly. This is responsibility. Not because you owe me anything, but because I should have seen you sooner. She lowered her gaze, fighting emotion. Sir, you have always been kind. That is enough. Martha, he said quietly, kindness is not enough. Silence settled again. Heavy, thick, honest. Then Raymond stood up abruptly, as if the decision had struck him all at once. I am coming with you today. She blinked. Coming with me? Yes, he said. To see Caleb. To see whatever needs to be seen. She looked startled, almost frightened. Sir, that neighborhood is not safe for someone like you. Then I will be safe with someone like you, he answered. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She had been invisible her entire life, and now here was a man who owned half the skyline of Atlanta telling her she was someone worth following, someone worth trusting, someone worth protecting. That afternoon, when her shift ended, Martha hesitated before walking toward the front door. She seemed smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like a person trying to process a change she never expected. Raymond grabbed his keys, ignoring the puzzled looks from the staff. He followed her down the driveway, the same path she had walked the night before, but this time with a presence beside her that felt heavy and real. They walked in silence for a few blocks, the air warm, the sun beginning to lower. Raymond noticed the way she held her side when she walked, the quiet pain she tried to hide. He slowed his pace to match hers. When they reached the old neighborhood, Martha paused and looked at him, her eyes filled with a lifetime of fear and hope. Sir, she whispered, I need you to prepare yourself. Their home is very humble. Raymond answered softly. Martha, I am the one who should be ashamed, not them. And with that, they stepped toward the small duplex, carrying a truth that was finally beginning to unfold. The sun hung low in the sky as Martha guided Raymond through the narrow walkway leading to the small duplex. The building looked even older in daylight, its wooden boards warped from weather and time, its windows clouded with age. Raymond felt a strange heaviness in his chest, the kind that comes from seeing a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Martha knocked gently on the faded door, the same way she had done the night before. A few seconds later, the door cracked open and the grandmother appeared, her gray hair pinned back, her eyes tired but kind. When she saw Martha, her face softened immediately, but when she noticed Raymond standing beside her, she stiffened with uncertainty. Martha placed a reassuring hand over the grandmother's. It is all right, Miss Helen. This is my employer, Mr. Raymond Cole. He came to visit Caleb. The grandmother blinked, stunned. A billionaire? Here? She whispered under her breath. Raymond lowered his voice. Please, ma'am, just call me Raymond. She hesitated, then stepped aside and opened the door wider. The moment he entered, everything inside him shifted. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm soup. The living room was barely larger than a walk-in closet, the wallpaper peeling, the furniture mismatched and worn, but everything was clean, neatly arranged, and full of quiet effort. In the corner, by a thin window, young Caleb lay on a small cot with a blanket tucked around him. His chest rose and fell with slow, labored breaths, each one sounding like it cost him strength he did not have. An oxygen machine sat on a crate beside him, humming weakly, its plastic tubing taped carefully to avoid slipping. The boy turned his head toward them, his big eyes tired but alert. Martha knelt beside him, her whole face softening in a way Raymond had never seen before. Caleb, she whispered, touching his forehead gently. I brought a friend to meet you. The boy looked at Raymond with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Is he a doctor? He asked, his voice faint. Raymond knelt down beside them. No, buddy, he said softly. I am just someone who wanted to meet you because Martha says you are very brave. Caleb managed a small smile. She tells everybody that. The grandmother chuckled softly, wiping her eyes. He is right. She does. As Martha adjusted the boy's pillow, Raymond noticed how instinctively she moved, how deeply she cared. It was the kind of tenderness that could not be taught, only lived. How is he doing today? Martha asked Helen. The grandmother sighed. He had a hard night. The machine is failing again, and the medication is almost out. I have been cutting the doses in half to make them last. Raymond felt something hot flare inside him. Cutting them in half. She nodded helplessly. It is either that or none at all. We cannot afford the refills yet. They keep raising the prices. Martha closed her eyes, her face tightening with worry. I will take another shift this week. We will figure it out. No, Raymond said gently but firmly. Both women turned to him in confusion. He looked at Caleb, then back at them. I saw the medical bills on your table last night. And the envelopes. And the medications. No one should be suffering like this. Not on my watch. Martha whispered. Sir, please, you do not have to do this. I do, he insisted. Because I should have known. And because you have been carrying this burden alone for too long. The room grew quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the oxygen machine. Raymond stood up slowly. Today we start fixing this. The grandmother's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Cole, we cannot accept charity. This is not charity, he said softly. This is justice. He walked toward the machine and examined it closely. This thing is outdated. It is barely functional. By the end of today, you will have a brand new oxygen system delivered here. And tomorrow morning, Caleb will see a specialist at the best children's hospital in Atlanta. The grandmother gasped, covering her mouth. Martha's eyes widened in disbelief, her voice trembling. Sir, this is too much. No, Martha, he said gently. This is the minimum. You have given your entire life to helping others. It is time someone helps you. Caleb looked up at him, weak but hopeful. Does that mean I will not hurt so much anymore? Raymond swallowed hard. That is exactly what it means, buddy. Tears streamed silently down Martha's face, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand, as if she was not used to being seen crying. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, Thank you, sir. But Raymond shook his head slowly. Do not thank me yet. We are just getting started. With that, the billionaire who once walked past her without noticing now stood in a humble living room, seeing more than he ever had in his entire life. The rest of the afternoon moved like a slow awakening, the kind that forces a man to look at his own reflection and wonder how he had missed so much for so long. Raymond stood in that tiny living room, watching Caleb struggle to sit up, watching the grandmother blink away tears she had grown accustomed to hiding, and watching Martha hover protectively near the child like a shield made of love and exhaustion. Something inside Raymond shifted in a way he had not expected. For years he had lived in a mansion filled with marble, glass, and silence. But in this cramped living room, surrounded by peeling paint and flickering light, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Humanity. After checking the oxygen machine again, he stepped aside and pulled out his phone. He typed quickly, his voice low but commanding as he spoke to his assistant. I need an emergency delivery. Pediatric oxygen concentrator, the latest model, and a full supply of medication for a child with chronic lung disease. Deliver it within 2 hours. No excuses. He paused, then added, also contact Children's Hospital of Atlanta. I need the top pediatric pulmonologist to evaluate a case first thing tomorrow morning. Tell them it is urgent. When he ended the call, Martha stared at him as if she was seeing a stranger. Sir, you really did not have to do all of that. Yes, Martha, I did, he replied. You have been fighting this battle alone, and it is time someone fights with you. She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. Sir, I do not know how to repay something like this. You do not repay it, he said softly. You accept it. But acceptance was not easy for a woman who had spent her whole life being told not to expect anything from anyone. She looked down, twisting her hands, as if unsure what she was allowed to feel. Meanwhile, Caleb tugged lightly at her sleeve. Auntie Martha, he whispered, is he really going to help me breathe better? She leaned down and smiled, brushing his hair back gently. Yes, baby, he is. The grandmother finally stepped closer, wiping her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. Mr. Cole, I do not know what to say. You barely know us. Why would you do all this? Raymond looked at her, then at the frail little boy. Because someone should have helped you long before I ever walked through that door. The grandmother covered her mouth again, trembling. Bless you, she whispered. Then she turned away, unable to say more. Raymond glanced at Martha. She was staring at the floor, her eyes full but controlled, as if she was afraid that showing too much emotion might break something fragile inside her. Martha, he said quietly, I followed you last night because I thought something was wrong. I had no idea you were the one holding everything together. Her voice shook. Sir, a lot of people hold things together quietly. I am nothing special. You are wrong, he said, his voice firm. You are the strongest person I know. She blinked rapidly, the words almost too much for her to process. Before she could answer, a sudden coughing fit pulled their attention back to Caleb. His small body tensed, his hand gripping the blanket. Martha rushed to his side, placing her hand on his back and whispering, "Easy. Honey, breathe slow. I am right here." Raymond watched helplessly, his heart twisting as each cough echoed painfully through the room. When the boy finally settled, drained and trembling, Raymond made another silent decision. He would not allow this child to suffer another night like this. Not one more hour. He walked toward the door. "I will be right back," he said. "Where are you going, sir?" Martha asked. "To fix something," he answered. "And I will return soon." But Martha stepped quickly in front of him, blocking his path. "Sir, please be careful. This neighborhood is not safe." The grandmother nodded. "After dark, you really should not be out there alone." Raymond gave a small, reassuring smile. "Do not worry. I am not the one who needs protecting tonight." He stepped outside into the warm late afternoon air, the street quiet except for distant traffic. For the first time in years, he felt purpose running through his veins. Not profit, not business. Purpose. Real, human purpose. And as the door closed behind him, Martha watched him through the thin curtain, her heart pounding with something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Raymond walked with purpose, each step echoing with a determination he had not felt in years. The sun was slipping behind the old rooftops, casting a warm orange glow across the cracked sidewalks as he headed toward his SUV. The air smelled of dust, cut grass, and a faint hint of engine oil from the cars parked along the curb. He knew exactly where he needed to go. Within 20 minutes, he was standing inside a medical supply store on the edge of the city, speaking directly to the manager. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. "I need a pediatric oxygen system delivered immediately to an address in East Atlanta. I also need backup tanks, a nebulizer, and a full month of medication to manage chronic pediatric lung disease." The manager blinked, stunned. "Sir, that type of equipment usually requires a processing period. Insurance, paperwork, authorization, skip all of that," Raymond interrupted. "I will pay in full right now. Triple the price if you can have it delivered within 2 hours." Money had never been his language of compassion, but today it was the fastest tool he had to save a life. The manager hesitated only a second before nodding and rushing to arrange everything. Within minutes, Raymond had paid more than most people earned in 6 months. But it did not matter. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something that made sense. As he walked back to his SUV, his phone vibrated. It was a message from his assistant. "Hospital appointment confirmed for 8 a.m. tomorrow. Dr. Arlen will see the patient personally." Raymond exhaled, relief washing over him. He drove back to the neighborhood as the streetlights flickered on one by one, illuminating the old houses with a soft, golden haze. When he approached the duplex, he saw Martha through the window, seated beside Caleb with a damp cloth on the boy's forehead. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped, her eyes heavy, but she still whispered to him with patience and gentleness. When Raymond stepped inside, the room turned quiet. Martha looked at him with concern. "Sir, are you all right? You were gone for some time." He nodded. "Everything is arranged. The equipment will be here soon." The grandmother clasped her hands to her chest. "Mr. Cole, you do not know what this means to us." Caleb lifted his head slightly, his voice shaky. "Will I be able to breathe better soon?" Raymond knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on the blanket. "Yes, Caleb, you will." The boy smiled weakly and closed his eyes, comforted. Martha watched them both, tears filling her eyes again. She tried to hide them, turning her face away, but her voice betrayed her. "Sir, no one has ever cared enough to help him like this." Raymond looked at her, his voice soft but steady. "No one cared enough to see you either, Martha. But I see you now." Her breath caught. She had spent her entire life folding into the background, silent, invisible, unnoticed. And now the man she worked for was speaking to her, as if she were someone who mattered. Someone worthy of dignity. Someone worthy of being seen. Before she could respond, headlights appeared outside the window. A white delivery van rolled to a stop in front of the duplex. The equipment had arrived. Martha covered her mouth in disbelief, her whole body trembling. For the first time that day, the weight on her shoulders began to lift. And in that tiny living room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and secondhand furniture, a billionaire finally understood what real wealth looked like. The delivery team carried the new oxygen system into the small living room, their footsteps soft against the creaking floorboards as they unpacked the equipment. The grandmother stood frozen beside the doorway, her trembling hands pressed to her chest, unable to believe what she was seeing. Martha hovered near Caleb, brushing his hair back gently while trying to hold herself together, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. Raymond guided the technicians with calm authority, pointing to a clear spot along the wall. "Set it up here," he said. His voice carried certainty, but inside he felt something he had not felt in years, something warm and raw, like his heart was being rewired piece by piece. The machine hummed to life, clean and steady, nothing like the failing unit that had struggled to keep Caleb breathing. When the technician placed the new oxygen tube gently around the boy's face, Caleb inhaled, slow at first, then deeper, fuller, as if the air had suddenly turned to gold. His small chest rose without strain, and he let out a relieved sigh. "It does not hurt," he whispered. "It does not hurt anymore." The grandmother broke. Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth, her body shaking with quiet sobs. "Thank you, God," she whispered. "Thank you." Martha stepped back, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her faded uniform. She looked at Raymond, her voice barely steady. "Sir, you have changed his whole world today." Raymond shook his head gently. "No, Martha. You did. I am only helping you finish what you started." She stared at him, trying to understand how a man who lived in a mansion full of wealth could know how to speak with such humility. Outside, the evening settled into darkness, the streetlights buzzing softly as night took hold. The delivery van pulled away, leaving the small home glowing with a faint, warm hope. Inside, the air felt different. Lighter. Safer. Human. Caleb drifted into the first peaceful sleep he had experienced in months, his tiny hand resting on the blanket, his breathing soft and steady under the rhythm of the new oxygen machine. Martha pulled a chair closer and sat beside him, exhaustion melting into quiet relief. She placed her hand over his and whispered, "Rest now, baby. You are going to be all right." Raymond watched her, realizing this was not simply care. It was devotion born from a lifetime of giving. A lifetime of sacrifice, a lifetime unseen. And as he stood in that humble room, the billionaire who had built empires suddenly understood that true power was not measured in wealth or buildings or influence. It was measured in the quiet strength of people like Martha Green, who carried the world on their shoulders and asked for nothing in return. The new oxygen machine filled the room with a soft rhythmic hum, the kind of sound that carried reassurance instead of fear. Caleb slept peacefully, his breath smooth and steady for the first time in months. The grandmother sat beside him, whispering prayers of gratitude under her breath, her hands still trembling from the shock of hope finally arriving at her door. Martha stood near the window, staring out at the dim street, as if she needed a moment to collect the pieces of herself that had been stretched thin for years. Raymond stepped beside her, the quiet between them full but gentle. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I still do not understand why you chose to help us." Raymond shook his head slowly. "I did not choose, Martha. I realized that I have lived in a world where people like you work in silence, carry burdens alone, and still manage to love without limits." She lowered her gaze, her hands twisting nervously. "I am just trying to do what is right." "You have been doing what is right your entire life," he said. "You just never had someone standing behind you." She exhaled shakily, finally allowing a single tear to slip down her cheek. "Thank you, sir. Not for the money, not for the machines, but for seeing us. Truly seeing us." Raymond felt his chest tighten. "You should have been seen a long time ago, Martha." They stood there for a moment, watching the glow of the oxygen machine reflect softly on the walls. Caleb stirred slightly, then relaxed again, proof that the world had shifted in his favor tonight. As Raymond prepared to leave, he turned back to Martha and the grandmother. "Tomorrow is only the beginning. He will get the care he needs, and you will not face this alone anymore." Martha placed her hand over her heart, overwhelmed. "Sir, you have changed everything." Raymond shook his head gently. "No, Martha, you changed me." And as he stepped out into the quiet night, one truth echoed louder than the hum of the machine behind him. Real wealth was never about the size of a mansion, but the size of a heart that chooses to lift another. This was her story. This was her strength. And he would never forget it.